Welcome back. Now what we're going to do is see our package in action, run some of its main commands, and once we've seen it running, we'll go back and explain how it's working. So to begin with, if we're here in section 5 and we have a look at our trained models directory, which is one of the directories inside the regression model directory, you can see that we just have the _init py file. There are no other files inside train models right now. However, if I head over to my console and I run the command tox-e train, I'm going to run the train pipeline script and it tells me that it succeeded. And if I head back now to trained models, here we have the output pickle file. What's happened here is that we've used tox to trigger our train pipeline script. So, what's tox? How does it work? Let's first have a look at the tox homepage. As you can see, tox is a generic virtual environment management and test command line tool. So what that really means for our purposes here is that tox means we don't have to worry about different operating systems. We can run tox on Windows, Mac OS, Linux, and get the same behavior across the platforms. We don't have to worry about things like setting up Python paths, configuring environment variables. We do all of that stuff inside our tox-ini file. So it's a really powerful way for us to be able to run tests of different versions of Python, set up environment variables, get over operating system differences. This is a great tool, and it's worth adding to your toolbox. To get started with tox, head over to your command prompt and run pip install tox. I've already got it installed, so nothing to add on my machine. Mac OS and Linux users won't need to worry about this, but on certain Windows machines, if you try and run a tox command and you get an invocation error, it's likely to be because of this known issue with Python on Windows with the max path limitation. So this is a nasty gotcha. I'll put the full stack trace that you'll experience if you are encountering this issue in the lecture notes. The fix is to open up your registry and make this adjustment as detailed in the Python docs. So if you go to registry editor, I'm here on Windows 10, and as per the instructions in the docs, you go to local machine, system, current control set, control, and we're looking for file system, and then long paths enabled, and you just want to make sure this is set to 1, and I'll link to this in the lecture notes because this can be a confusing gotcha. But once that's set up, then we're good to start using tox, and all our tox configuration is in the tox-ini file. So if we go to our project, we can close this up. Our tox-ini file is here. There's a few comments at the top here explaining more about tox and what it is and why we're using it. So there's quite a lot happening in our tox-ini file. Let me break it down a bit for you. Every time you see something in square brackets like this, this is a different tox environment. And an environment is something which is going to set up a virtual environment in your .tox hidden directory. We can run commands within a specific environment, and we can also inherit commands and dependencies from other environments. So this is a sort of foundational unit when we're working with tox. We have the default tox environment and a default test-env environment. And what this means is that if we just run the tox command on its own, it's going to run all the commands in these different environments, and you can see that these names correspond. So test package, there's the test package environment, type checks, there's the type checks environment, you can see style checks and lint. Let's continue breaking these down. So the test environment is just kind of like almost like a base class. If you think of inheritance, we have this install command, and so this install command is going to be consistent wherever we inherit from this base test env. For our test package, we define this deps, and that tells Tox that for this particular environment, we're going to need to install the test requirements txt file. So we have the path to our requirements and test requirements txt. There it is. This -r with no space is just the Tox syntax. We set certain environment variables like our Python path, and then the commands here is what commands will run within this particular environment. So you can see that we run first the train pipeline, and then it's pytest, and this / indicates that it's the same command just broken up across multiple lines. So we're passing in a few arguments to pytest so that we get verbose output and we can see any logs or print statements, and then this is the directory where we're going to trigger pytest. Don't worry if you're not familiar with the tests yet, we'll be getting to that later in this section. So let me demonstrate this to you now. If I go back to my command prompt here and clear this, if I run tox -e, -e means I'm going to specify a Tox environment, and go test package. This is then running that sequence of commands. So you can see we've got train pipeline, as we have here, and we also then have the pytest command, so that we're running our 2 tests in our test directory over here. There's the first one, and there's the second one, and we'll be coming back to go over those in more detail later. You can also see that before any of these ran, there was an attempt to install the requirements, but they're already installed, and so the command was able to proceed. Okay, let's go back to the tox.ini file here and look at some of the other commands. So we also have a train command, and you can see that the command here is a little different because we're just triggering train pipeline, we're not running the tests. So this is a way for us to define a simpler command, and you can see here that Tox isn't just limited to tests as some people mistakenly think. So if I use this command now, I'm going to do tox-e train, and that triggers our train pipeline. And because we're inheriting, you see this colon syntax with so we'll inherit the environment variables from both test package and the test env. So our Python path is set, and we won't encounter any of the usual gotchas that you might do when running certain scripts. We also have tox commands to run our type checks, style checks. These are using bits of tooling that we'll be getting into later in the section, but it's just a really elegant way for us to make sure that our Python code adheres to things like PEP8 and has a consistent style that makes it really easy for other programmers to work with. Now our base tox command here, as defined by this list of environments, is going to run all of these. So let's see that in action. If I just run tox, we get the training, running the different tests, and then it's running the type checks with MyPy, and then we're running the style checks with Flake8. So everything runs, and at the end we get this output telling us that it's all run successfully. So make sure you're able to run the tox commands on your local machine, that everything's running as expected, because we'll be making updates and checking that everything's working to test our understanding as we progress through the next lectures, where we'll dig into the different modules that we have in our package. And I know that we've introduced a lot of tools and potentially unfamiliar technologies here. Don't worry, we'll be explaining more in detail as we go through our package. Also, if you feel like you wouldn't be able to write the tox.ini file from scratch, don't worry, that's always how everybody feels when they first start using a tool with a complex config. Over time, you'll gradually learn how the different parts work. The main thing is that you have a general idea of what's happening and know how to trigger the commands. A lot of times with these sorts of ini files, you'll start with some sort of template or modify an existing ToxINI from another project. So it's rare that you find yourself with just an empty file and you have to write a file like this from scratch. Okay, so just bear that in mind if you're finding some of this confusing, and the more you use it, the clearer things will become. Alright, I'll see you in the next lecture.